All right, guys. So it's that time again. Time for another amazing indie creator interview. You guys know I love to turn people on to stories that they may not have heard of otherwise, that, maybe off the beaten path, even for my individual comic tastes. But today, I get to talk to a writer who, had a very different career before maybe the last 3 years, just decided, you know what? The world's ending, people are dying. I'm going to die happy and I'm going to write comics. And he's done just that, kickstarting all sorts of sci-fi and fantasy and now superhero comics. So here to talk to me about all of the above is Trevor Fernandes-Lenkiewicz. How you doing, man?
I'm great, man. What an intro. And what like a well put together origin story you've been able to verbalize, because the way that I do it is so much messier. So I'm happy to be here and I'm grateful for that introduction, man.
Oh man, no problem at all. I'm excited to have you here. So of course we're here to talk about Rise, which is live on Kickstarter now. As the time this podcast goes live, the Kickstarter for Rise issues 1 and 2 is now live. But this isn't your first go around. This isn't your first trip to the well, so to speak. So I want to hear from you. Like, what is your comic book writing origin story?
Yeah, so back during the pandemic, I was just like a young guy kind of wrapping up college, having no idea what the world was going to look like. And I decided that, you know, um, I had to take matters into my own hands if I really wanted to do it that badly. And so I took to Kickstarter with this project that ended up evolving and growing called Area 51, the Helix Project. And it became a 6 issue sci-fi thriller about this half extraterrestrial boy who ends up getting driven to uncover the circumstances surrounding his father's murder. And it sends him spiraling into the jaw of a Cold War genetics conspiracy where he's forced to reckon with what really makes us human.
Mhm.
And I spent about the first 2 years of my career working on that story and really learning sort of what I had to offer in terms of my voice creatively, but also learning how to play around with the structure and the format and like all of the different sort of technical leanings of writing for comics, because it's so different, right? Like you're writing for something. The writing isn't the thing itself. You're writing for something. And I
Right.
that was a huge lesson. And after that, I decided that I really didn't want to be pigeonholed into being the sci-fi guy. And so um, I produced a collection of 4 short stories of all different genres, none of which were sci-fi,
Mhm.
uh, really sort of channeling my Vertigo influences and wanting to really push myself and explicitly try things that I either felt like I didn't do well on the Helix project, or that I didn't, or that I wasn't able to show just because, the space didn't afford me that. And here we are with Rise. And the first issue will actually be hitting physical hands by the time we go to Heroes Con. And, actually, I guess by the time this hits, it'll be post Heroes. But um, issue 2, along with the opportunity to get issue 1, is going to be popping over on Kickstarter, and we're doing hopefully something different with superheroes. And I never wanted to feel like I was barking up someone else's tree or doing a less good version of something that somebody's already done really well, and that's what we're here to chat about.
Nice. So you said something earlier that caught my attention. You said like you start writing Area 51 and you go through a period where you're trying to find your voice, like what you have to offer to whether it's the medium, the audience, or what have you. How is that process for you? Like distinguishing yourself from your influences.
Yeah, that was a long and arduous process, because you have to be able to recognize when you're copying, when you're imitating, and sometimes you're never able to tell. Like, and I think to a degree, all creative people, because of the way our brains work and how osmotic it is, you'll always kind of be poking around and finding little pieces of influence. Like, I think by the time I got to Helix Project 6 and I was promoting that book, it had like just struck me how much Brian Azzarello's Batman Broken City had influenced my voice as a writer, and it took me
Mm,
that long. I'd been talking about the book for 2 years, so you're always going throughout that process. But I remember thinking every time I wrote an internal monologue for the first few Helix Project issues, I was trying to ape Neil Gaiman, and so I I think a big part of it is just looking for your own faults, which I think is also a double-edged sword because if you become too indulgent in that tendency, um, you are potentially liable to paralyze yourself. But
mhm,
the self-reflection is the key, and being able to think about like what story you're telling and how you can best deliver that story. And so for me, when I wrote the Helix Project, it was so much about identity and about me like looking to figure myself out in a world that is trying to tell me and everybody else what to be and how to be it and why, right?
mhm.
Um, and so it was particularly important for me to develop that voice because it was even in keeping with the theme of the book.
Right.
Um, and I think one of the important elements to developing that was allowing it to change and grow as I was writing that series because I became more refined. I learned a little bit more about sort of the economy of the comic book page, but also the economy of language that this story was asking of me. Now that I kind of like took the wind up car and set it off running on its own.
Mm,
So I think the voice comes from that ability to self-reflect. It comes from the intention of your story, and eventually it will be shaped by your recognition of what your story is asking from you as the creator, and less about what you want the story to be.
that's good. So I'm gonna ask you this, right? What's the difference between your voice as a writer and say the voices of the characters you're writing for?
I think, at least for me, my voice is really like it's like the dark materials, right? I'm
Mm,
throwing all of these things out into space to be molded and shaped. And eventually, once those things begin to take on their form, you begin to separate the story and the characters from yourself. They kind of start to take on a life of your own, and it becomes a lot more about listening to them and to what they need in their story than it does about me being the creator and continuing to mold them because they already have a direction, they have a trajectory. There's like they're their own fucking, excuse my language,
mm,
metaphysics to forming themselves, and it then becomes okay, what do you do next? It's
mm.
not what happens next. What are you doing next, or what do you need next? Um, and I think that's sort of integral in that process is learning to listen and hoping that you've developed enough of an understanding of your cast. And that to me, that's always primary because I'm always a very like character driven person. I'm
Mhm.
only interested in cool plot if it has something to do with the wants and the desires of the characters.
Got you. Okay. And so like it's interesting, right? Because I talk to a lot of indie creators and you're not the first whose first kind of project out the gate was sci-fi. And like to me, that's scary because in sci-fi, it's like it's not just okay, who's the character, what's the hero's journey, what's the obstacle, and so on. But it's
Mhm.
also like what's the world that they're in and how do I make that, relatable enough that you understand it, but new enough that it's interesting. And
Mm.
that just seems like a lot to tackle in your first project. How did that process go for you, just sort of fleshing out, what Area 51 became?
Yeah, well, it was twofold. I think emotionally and thematically, the story that wasn't terribly far off from the one that we live in,
Mm,
um, especially because it deals with um, it just it deal. I wanted to really dive into the emotionality of it, and I find that sometimes being able to reflect some elements of realism make it easier for the reader to take that leap. You're asking them to do a little bit less work.
mm,
Um, there was also an element of pragmatism that went into that because I knew I was a vastly unexperienced writer, and I wanted to. Well, like there was always imperative for me to test myself. I wanted to make sure I was setting up pieces that I felt like were within my reach. I
mm,
didn't want to overdo it, and I think a lot of the time, younger writers get so embroiled in the world that they lose their story, they lose their characters, they lose the emotional core of why this thing is even being told. And that was always the priority for me. I always move from, my stories always come from the chest. And
Mhm.
um, that is what I want to focus on. And I wanted to make sure that that's the position I could move from because it's where I felt most comfortable and it's where I felt like I could tell the best story. Um, because I am easily distractible, just as a general rule of thumb. And I feel like if I were to go too big with the world and the concepts and the sort of sociological underpinnings of the society that this character lives in, I would get distracted and I would have lost sight. And I think, for me, a lot of it was about building skills pieces at a time and then learning how to execute them. And so that's why the Helix Project, I think the world was always so small. The cast was crazy small. I mean, maybe a handful of characters that have names.
Mhm.
Um, and for me, that was important because I wanted each of them to matter just as much as, keeping the world small. I just wanted to feel like I could make everything identifiable, that nothing felt repetitive, or like it was just there to occupy space.
Mhm. Gotcha. And so with the Helix Project, right? It's your first comic, but you funded it on Kickstarter. Like, how was that? Like taking this idea from your head, convincing a percentage of the public to, put their money behind it so that you could make it happen. How did that go for you?
Um, Slowly, agonizingly, and kind of expensively. I
Right.
mean, it's so much of a crapshoot, and I think innately a lot of us creatives are so reluctant um, to dive into like the marketing and sales angle of what we do, but it's so necessary.
Mhm.
And so a part of it was me learning more about the market and realizing as a fan of comics just how different the crowdfunding comic book market is from the direct market because it's the behaviors of that consumer base are so vastly different. Even though there is
Mhm.
a lot of overlap, you're seeing more and more people who still go to the comic shop every Wednesday or Tuesday now or however it works.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of those people are still buying books on Kickstarter, but the behavior is different. And so
Mhm.
having to start having the ability to interpret that was important. I still think it's something that I'm not particularly good at. To be
Mhm.
honest with you, it's funny. I have some. It's weird to say that I have people coming up behind me because I still feel like the new guy,
Right.
but I do have people who are like, "How do you do this with the marketing?" And I'm like, "I'm really sorry. I have no idea what I'm doing." Like a big part of it is me being like a really cheesy and honest human being and just trying to talk about why the story matters to me and learning a little bit more about how to better describe that as I went on.
Mhm.
And I think a big part of it was I got better, my collaborators got better, and we had more to show as time went on. Um, I think unfortunately I'm one of the worst people in Comics Kickstarter to actually talk about how to be uber effective on the business and logistics side
Mhm.
because I think most of where my success comes from is just being very emotionally honest about the stories,
Mhm.
and people I would like to think relate to that. Um, and on the other side, uh, I'll pat myself on the back enough to know that I have good taste in art, and I work with really talented people whose art does a lot of the talking for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that it's still a battleground. I constantly find myself coming up with hypotheses as to what's happening in Kickstarter and why. And I would say at least 50% of the time I'm completely wrong. So, um, yeah, it's really I just kind of try to move from an honest place about the creative elements in the story and hope that people latch onto it.
Mhm.
Um, Unfortunately, I'm probably one of the least pragmatic people on the platform.
That's funny. Now you hit on something. We hit on a couple of things that I'm going to touch back on, but the first thing was just like the fact that the Kickstarter comic market or crowdfunded comics is a very different market from the direct market, at least the US direct market for comics. And it's funny because it's like both everyone's target audience and no one's target audience because
Mm.
I'm reviewing books. And so my general rule is, do I have the money? If so, great, I'll buy a comic. And it kind of, I'm open other than that. But for me, it's been the more I get into these interviews, the more I like find friends that are in the indie space and stuff like that, the more projects keep coming up. And it's like, okay, how do I balance this with my pull list, especially considering I don't
Mm.
know a new Kickstarter is coming until it's here. And now I got 30 days to find the money for this book. And so when people are
Right.
buying these Kickstarter comics, it is a hard choice to do it. And then let alone the fact that, the truly indie comics, it's very rare that you're going to buy a comic and it's $5, right? Like,
Hmm.
so you're looking at higher price points, you're looking at longer shipping times typically. Um, and in some cases, you're looking at uh you got to there's a whole different level of scrutiny because the supply chain's a little bit different, so the product that you get looks and feels different. Sometimes that's for the best, sometimes it's for worse, right? It's definitely a different beast. What are some of the lessons that you've learned to sort of bringing your comics to market in this way versus maybe, I don't know, even like self-publishing from your own website or going out and trying to like get a comic or an LCS to stock your books or something like that.
Yeah, I think a major part of that is, and this sounds really basic and simple, but it's been like probably the biggest game changer for me is learning to plan ahead. I think in the
Mm,
beginning, I knew so little about what was going to happen next that I felt incredibly insecure about even trying to come up with an idea for what it looks like a week from now, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now.
mm,
I'm very much one of those people that I have to learn by doing. And after a couple of these things, I begin to realize, okay, maybe it's better for me to like maybe it would be more intelligent of me to be a little bit further along in the project so I have more to share and I can be more selective about the art that I'm able to share, right? I don't have to just share the first 5 pages that are done. I can
mm,
be more selective and I can use that to create graphics for social media. Finding ways to entice people to be your word of mouth, that's everything. Or
mm,
that's what it's been for me, right? Because I'm really bad at picking topics or ideas that are particularly hot. My take is that like I have this idea that I want to attack, and I think about the best way that I could tell that story through a comic, and then I'm like, that's the thing I'm making, right? It's not like,
mm,
can I actually sell this? I That is never really a thought that crosses my mind as I work on something. That's
mm,
something I think about after. And so for me, it's like once I do have that and I do have a story and I have pieces assembled, then it's like, okay, how can I leverage what I do have for the future? And a big part of that is, knowing how to take advantage of your cover art or your interiors and putting it in front of the right people, um, using social media and even like guerrilla marketing yourself, going to
mm,
conventions. I think there's a surprisingly small amount of people, volumetrically speaking, that carry over from conventions to Kickstarters. But I will say some of my biggest supporters, some of the people that show up day in, day out, and will really engage with the work and contribute to campaigns. They're people that I met at conventions, where I've just
mm,
they've been able to watch me speak
yeah,
about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and be genuine about it because I love what I do. And it's hard for me to contain myself and to be sort of like conservative with my expressions. You know what I mean? I'll get loud, I'll get excited, I'll move my arms around.
yeah,
And I think that's really endearing
mm,
to some people, and that's done me a lot of justice. But as far as what I've learned along the lines of being in the Kickstarter market is you have to realize that things that translate in the DM don't always do well in crowdfunding, and you have to realize that it is a different audience, and that I think above all, you're trying to build a cult. Like that's the end goal. You're building people who trust you and have faith in you and your work, sure, certain intellectual property and certain concepts will appeal more innately to other people.
Mhm.
But I think at the end of the day, you're teaching people to trust you, as a creative, as somebody who's telling a story, but also as a quote unquote business person, someone who's selling them a product. You want them to feel like they can trust you, on so many different levels, right? It's like I feel like on Kickstarter, actually, this is the best analogy I could possibly have. You kind of have to be a three-tier scorer. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And when
Mhm.
I'm if I'm relating it to basketball, you got to be able to attack at the rim and be in person and talk to people and engage. You've got to be able to be like a mid-range scorer where, you can create a little bit of distance and like have good enough of a show of artwork and sort of basic marketing material on the internet so that somebody who is in another state, in another country, is going to be able to acknowledge what you're doing and feel engaged by that. And then I think from the 3-point line is like you're you're able to do it from such a distance that like you're building reputation and other people are talking about you, and you're so distant from the hoop that it's really just it's just another level of range. So yeah, I would say those are sort of the major takeaways. And also know that like sometimes algorithms are just algorithms. I think a major part of it is because you're putting it out on your own, it feels so much more personal, and it's so easy to take the numbers game and let it affect you to an unhealthy degree. And even as I say this, like I'm preparing for my ninth Kickstarter, and those first 2 days, I will be refreshing that Kickstarter page every 30 minutes. Don't worry, like that never goes away. But you can't let that control you.
So I'm gonna follow this analogy you've put forth because I've never heard anyone put it like that, but it makes all the sense in the world to me, right? So the three-tiered score. So I'm gonna ask this: would you agree that the mid-range is the most difficult, right? Like in basketball, if you're at the
Mhm.
dunker spot, right? Like you're big enough, you're strong enough, like nobody's gonna keep you from the basket, right?
Mhm.
So that hand-to-hand selling, you got it, right?
Mhm.
The long range from the internet, right? Like that's something people train for. They work on it day in, day out. As long as you got enough distance, you can post up, you can spot up, I should say. You're gonna hit your threes, right? Klay Thompson
Mhm.
is a shooter. Maybe Klay
Yeah.
Thompson's not a good example this year, right? But but the point is that's a specialty, and as long as you're good at it, you're good at it. The
Mhm.
mid range, though, there's the most competition there. You need
Yep.
the most finesse, and often it requires such a soft touch to finish a mid range shot.
Mhm.
Is that the most difficult part in comic selling for you?
I think so. I think so, 100%. Because you're in the way that you're navigating defenders, you're navigating the market and you're navigating, I mean, so much social media and sort of trying to capture attention hmm, in a really like trying to think of the best way to put it. Like, I mean, you're basically in the mid range, for example, you're really not going to create a lot of distance between you and the defender, right? Like, you
Right.
really got to look these things dead in the eye and maneuver in just the right way
Hmm.
to get the bucket. And that very much feels like the case. Like you're looking at, you're trying to navigate trends and you're trying to navigate the flow of the algorithm and whatever these different platforms want from you, whether it's the crowdfunding platform itself or the social media platform that you're trying to market that campaign on, or what have you, right? You've also got competition, right? You've got your direct competition for whom that very limited amount of entertainment money
Hmm.
that the consumer has might go toward, as opposed to you. Um, and then you have like the added, I guess I would call this getting into foul trouble, but
Uh,
it's like you have the added element of a consumer either deciding that they no longer want the product
mm,
after they've pledged to it, or just no longer having the ability um, to back up their pledge
yeah.
financially. And that's another complication, huge complication actually.
Mm.
I mean, I've had, my God, I think Helix Project 6, I had almost $2,000 in drop pledges total. Like if you look
Jeez.
at like if you look at from start to finish cancellations and drop pledges,
Hmm.
that's a lot of money, and so that's another really harsh reality of crowdfunding is that dollar is not yours until like I would say 2 weeks after the campaign once everything is finalized.
Yeah, man, that's rough. Like,
Yeah.
just I can only imagine the stress in that moment.
Oh,
Um,
dude, I'll tell you what, there's nothing more stressful than seeing like a high valued pledge cancel.
mm,
You feel like you just got broken up with. Like that is
uh,
it is awful. And there are so many different reasons for why that happens. You try not to judge because people's circumstances change and uh, you know, it's like I'll say at my day job, like when I get worked up working in a restaurant, it's like it's just dinner.
right.
I try to be like it's just comics, but at the same time, it's comics and I've chosen to make that my life. So it's like that's a difficult balance to strike for sure.
Yeah. Oh, that's crazy. I was absolutely joking off camera. So okay. Anyway, full circle moment there, but but
No, you were totally right. You were totally right.
that is amazing. My bad, man. So
No, you're
the
good.
this so all right. So we talked about Kickstarter and just the sort of the woes of the platform, right? You finding yourself, right? I mean, obviously, you found success. You're on your ninth Kickstarter now, so you're going back to the well. Um, with it because so my background is music and music marketing. I've worked for indie labels. I've done like just freelance consulting and the works, right? And so for me, I'm so used to telling an artist, okay, go look, build your own castle. Like, sure, put your music on Spotify, do all the things. But the important thing is to find those people and bring them into your world so that the next time out, you can reach out directly to them and not to like some third, fourth, fifth party. Because you never know what's going to happen. The algorithm's going to change. Kickstarter's going to be like, trading cards are the thing now. So we're going to promote those instead, or RPG sets or whatever, right? But you've gone back to the well several times. What is it about Kickstarter that keeps you coming back?
No, I mean, I think there are a couple things, and one, if not two of those, are very specific to comics.
Hmm.
I think the competition the competition in terms of the platform, right? Like my optionality in terms of where I could go next is squandered by two things. Youth, because Kickstarter's been around. They have the
Hmm.
um the user base, they have
Hmm.
the interface and the infrastructure,
Hmm.
um, and the reputation. And so, you look at other outlets like, Indiegogo has a reputation now among crowdfunding comics. And the crazy thing is, and most people listening to this, I don't even need to say it. And
Hmm.
it's unfortunate that a platform now has to become inaccessible to a lot of creators because of bad eggs and it and that particularly saddens me because they're already so you already have to be a really, really crafty human being to create income streams or revenue streams using comics. And the fact
Yeah.
that that's been limited because of that is a real it really does bum me out. And I can see why. Because I personally, very clearly I follow that trend of not using it because I don't
Hmm.
want that association. But it's unfortunate that that is the case, right?
Yeah.
And then you look at other platforms, and I think it's just they're they're not really even in the race yet.
Yeah.
Like they
Yeah.
might have a cool user interface, but um, clearly the user base isn't there. I
Hmm.
think the sort of the little brother of the two sort of major platforms right now. You see like seasoned vets go on that platform and make less money than me. Um, and that I think is something to be conscious of, when you're
Hmm.
going and you're taking to a home for your work. Um, and I think, yeah, so Kickstarter has kind of become the obvious home there, in that regard. Saying that, am I particularly loyal to it as a platform? Not really. It
Yeah.
is just the most viable option. Like my buddy Pat, says this all the time, and he's sort of one of the foremost creators for comics on Kickstarter. He wishes that there was more competition
Yeah,
because it would force these platforms to continue getting better and offer more to their creator base. And I totally agree. I think Kickstarter does make noticeable improvements, but I think there are basic things that people have been asking for now for a decade that
hmm
we've still yet to see. So I think it has the optionality, it has the interface, the user base, and um, it has the reputation, and so that's sort of where it is. If I could pull a Spike Trotman and host everything on my website and not have to give a cut to, a large, I'm not going to say faceless company because it does
yeah,
have a company,
yeah,
but like a large machine, I would. But this is sort of the most viable outlet to get the job done.
for sure, for sure. And I got an email about some Kickstarter changes that hopefully do, make things a little bit easier. I think one of the things they're doing is they're going to start allowing people to pledge after the campaign's ended, which
Yeah.
I don't know. That can be weird with something like comics, right? Like you got to set the print run. You can't you don't want to
Mm.
overprint. But I don't know. I really hope they can do like sort of flex funding, right? I think that's the one thing that Indiegogo has that would have been advantageous had it not been for their reputation that sort
Mhm.
of ended up coming. But Indiegogo, if, no matter how much people back, you get to keep those pledges. It's not all or nothing.
Yeah.
Um, but eh, it's,
I do also think, and if I remember correctly, because I pledged to a couple of Indiegogo campaigns, I seem to remember they take out the money almost immediately, which
mm,
I think is a major player.
yes,
The fact that Kickstarter waits so long, and even if somebody doesn't cancel their pledge, there's a chance that it is dropped 30 days later, even
hmm
more. And that can be really difficult to deal with because then you also have to track people down and you feel like you're, pushing people into a corner. Even though, for all intents and purposes, they pledged to the project, it seems like this is something they want, right? But
right.
it's never a comfortable scenario to be in. So I also like that optionality. I don't know if I would ever run a campaign with flex funding because I think that there is something that makes the campaign feel more pressing and imperative by being
hmm
like, hey, if I don't hit this number, like we're screwed. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
there is, I think, a potential. Um, I don't even want to call it a marketing advantage. I think it is an emotional advantage
yeah.
because a lot of the people that contribute to these crowdfunding campaigns, some people know that they're not contributing to the most professional quality content. They
hmm
just want to help a creative person out who's looking to make something. And
Yeah,
if you're close to your goal and it's all or nothing, you might have a handful of people who are willing to put in who wouldn't have before or up their pledge that they wouldn't. So I
yeah,
think that, yeah, the fund or fail model, I think for most people actually is a little bit more competitively advantageous than the flex model because it makes it feel a little bit more nonchalant that way.
yeah. No, that makes sense. There was a campaign I just backed a couple days ago. I didn't even get them to their goal, but it was like, hey, who can get us over $2,000? And I was like, actually, my
Okay.
pledge would.
Yeah.
Boom. Here's your screenshot. I'm the $2,000 pledger,
Yeah.
and there we go. But anyway, we talked a lot about just sort of the economics and salesmanship. I want to get back to the stories, right? So you start out, as a career or in college, your major is molecular biology, right? Like you're going toward a career as a scientist, like just a very different career, but you feel compelled to tell stories.
Yeah.
What was that? What compelled you to do that?
Well, it was weird. It all kind of started because I had no friends in college that liked comics,
Mm,
and I started doing YouTube in college.
mm,
I would do like these reviews, and eventually I made friends, and I started doing like sort of commentaries, and I became more analytical because I felt like the review space was lacking. Um, pundits with the ability to comment on the technical application of the craft. So I
Mm,
started doing a lot of research on sort of how comics are made, strategies. I was reading screenplay and cinematography books. I was reading obviously the seminal Scott McCloud works and so on and so
mm,
forth, and figuring out like what makes comics different and how can I comment on comics the way that a film reviewer comments specifically on film, or um, you know, uh, 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 prose reviewers comment specifically on novels. And I really kind of began to fall in love with what makes comics different, right? Like what makes them so special. And I
mhm.
started doing interviews with people that I really admired. And they were like, "You really seem to like to get into the weeds of this. Why aren't you making comics?" And I would never really have an answer. It just never seemed feasible.
Mm,
And I had done it was like New York Comic Con in like 2019, I think. I had done a press panel. It was like a Marvel fanfare panel, and I had asked CB Cebulski and Chris Claremont like how they reconcile their sort of creative intentions with the need to satiate a big corporate entity. And
mm.
they gave me, rightfully so, a very company man answer.
Yeah.
Um, but after CB and I had sort of met in the walkway, and he was like, "Have you ever thought about working in comics?" And I was like, "Not until you asked me that question." And he was like, "Well, listen, we're looking for some editorial interns, and I think that you might be the right person to do something like that." So I applied, and I actually added an English degree to my undergrad and started
Uh,
studying English because I was not like a real reader growing up. I didn't have the attention span for it. And in the months to come, prepared. And it was like the week that hand sanitizer and toilet paper was selling out everywhere was the week I was interviewing at Marvel
yeah.
for the internship. And a week after that, we went on lockdown. And I was so heartbroken because I had never realized how much I wanted it. And I had gotten so much closer to something I never knew I wanted than uh, I ever thought possible. And so, I had a couple months of just being really sad and angry and depressed. And as everybody was, like we were facing an unprecedented event.
Right.
Um, but I was like, I don't really know if I want to ask permission to do what I want to do. And I thought about what kind of story I could tell. And I had just gone through a total identity crisis. I mean,
Hmm.
I thought my life was going to be a certain way. I thought I was going to wrap my undergrad in the middle of the pandemic and go on to either a doctoral program or get my master's, and then go work in a lab and go do theoretical research on protein pathways. And um, here I was, thinking about like how I can make a 7 panel grid work, even though
Hmm.
it's not geometrically that stable, right?
Right.
Um, and that's where the Helix Project kind of came from.
Mm,
It's about a boy who is told all of his life that he needs to be something and why he needs to be it, realizing that he just kind of needs to do his thing.
mm,
And if I'm boiling that down to its simplest pieces, that resonated with me at the time because, I think when I started writing the Helix Project, I would have been 23
mm.
or just turning 23, and I had no idea who the hell I was. Um, and so, yeah, that's what compelled me. I just opportunity met a real need to express um, a complication of my own life, and that evolved. That story became so much more
Mm.
than me being upset that I couldn't work at Marvel anymore.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Wow. Man, that's funny. So your origin story kind of lines up with the origin story of my channel. Like I started reading comics heavy in 2019. Um, and I was doing my music marketing stuff. I had a whole different YouTube channel and I had written a book. And so my plan for 2020 was to basically do an expanded edition of that book and then launch like a video course to go along with it. I ended up launching the course, but not the book because all of the tourism industry shut down, live
Mm,
music shut down. And it was like, okay, well, I'm selling this program and this stuff. to basically teach people how to make a living wage doing live music while they wait for their career to pop off in other ways. And now that's
Mm.
gone. So I was like, oh, I'd feel sleazy trying to sell this to people. I'll just chill. And at the same time, I was just had this growing affinity for comics. And so stimulus checks are coming. We're spending all the money on comics anyway.
Yeah.
So, find out we're pregnant. This would have been, yeah, this was 2020. And I'm like, all right, well, if I want to keep spending money on comics, I need to figure out some kind of way for this to at least make a little bit of money back.
Mm.
And so that's where the YouTube channel started. I was like, all right, well, if I can, let's call it $100 a month in from YouTube, then
Mhm.
cool. At least I know how many comics I can buy versus diapers. And here we are today, 4 years later.
Yeah.
But it's funny how life changes and all of a sudden you're like, well, I can't go without this thing that
Mhm.
wasn't important to me 6 months ago. You
Yeah.
know, it's interesting how that goes. Man,
Yeah. I mean, and it's crazy too. You think about that time in the world and how much of a hurricane life felt like. I feel like
mhm,
for most people, and just what's come out of it. It's weird reflecting on it now because it feels like so long ago.
right.
And I think about it now, like I just turned 27 a couple weeks ago.
Mm,
I'm like, dang. Like it was 3 years ago that I really started doing this thing, and I was like a child, but that's only 3 years. Like
yeah,
how much could really happen in 3 years? And you're like, oh, we went through the apocalypse and came out. Like
right.
that is kind of freaking wild.
Yeah. No, my daughter's 13, and I was just looking at pictures of her um, from when my youngest came home from the hospital. It's only been 3 years ago,
Mm.
but it is a different kid. My daughter at 10 and my daughter at 13, it feels like there's a 16-year-old between the two of them. Like it's
Yeah.
insane how time works. And I guess it's just specific intervals in life will just do that for you, right? But anyway,
Yeah. And
so
it's also kind of weird to think about the things that cling to you in those moments
mhm,
of change. I mean, for us, it was comics, right?
yeah,
Like in different ways, but it's crazy to think about like where you were in your life and how comics really latched themselves onto you and where I was in my life and the way comics did the same to me. That's kind of incredible. I think that's
yeah,
also like what makes the medium and what makes the stories that come from these things so damn powerful because it permeates all types of living, all types of life, all, you know, um, sort of spheres of existing,
right.
Like
Yeah,
that's cool, man. Like art is pretty cool, huh? Like we kind of
absolutely.
we did something right there.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. And it's funny. So we talked about Area 51, the Helix Project. We're going to talk about Rise, which means I have to skip over a huge chunk
Yeah.
in minutes to midnight. But I couldn't do this interview without shouting out that first story that was it the Misadventures of Melancholy Man?
Yeah.
And so there's all right, I won't spoil the 4-page story for you guys who need to just go out and read it. But there's this kid. He's going through a bit of a conflict, and his guardian angel shows up, or a guardian angel type figure.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me because this guardian angel, at least to me, read as Alan Moore. First of all, is that who he's supposed to be?
Yeah. Yeah. I love the interpretations too. Because I've gotten Guardian Angel, I've gotten sort of like the man on your shoulder, I've
Mm,
gotten like God,
uh,
and it's funny because to like Alan Moore is sort of all of those things to me, and like the one unifying thing is that yes, that is Alan Moore.
that is awesome. And so, with that, right, obviously, Alan Moore is enough of an influence on you to pay tribute to in your work. Who are some of the other people that have influenced you?
Oh man, so many. I mean, Dwayne McDuffie, like
Mm,
the especially what he did with the DC animated stuff in
mm,
the like late 90s, early 2000s. Like I grew up on that.
yeah.
That was my bread and butter. Um, I said it. I think I said it off air, but
Mm,
I hadn't realized like how much like Brian Azzarello's Batman Broken City
mm,
influenced my voice and my tendencies specifically,
yeah.
which um are really, really present in one of the short stories in Minutes. It's called Reflections and Other Little Devils, where I just got to be a little bit indulgent with like the internal monologue more than I had been for anything else before.
Hmm.
And it could just be like flowery enough and poetic enough and like let the art do more of the work. That was a lot of fun. I mean, Neil Gaiman, I had actually read several of his novels before I had completed Sandman, so he's been a really pervasive influence on me. Um, Man, Scott Snyder, I mean, Court of Owls, and his approach on Batman and the way he was able to invoke the history while also feeling new, like it was moving in a new direction,
Hmm.
was really important for me. And the way that he would talk about themes, um, that I think was really instrumental for me because I wasn't like the most perceptive to those things as a reader when I first started getting into comics because I just wasn't a reader. Like I didn't have much of an attention span. But then I would read the book and he would give you just enough and like follow through in terms of like the execution of the storytelling. Like, oh, this means something. Like Batman fighting these people in his home that he thought he knew. Like there's something deeper there than
Hmm.
just these badass action scenes that Greg Capullo is drawing. Um, so those guys were big. Um, I'd have to shout out like Pete Tomasi, the
Hmm.
heart that he puts
Yes.
into his work, the emotionality, the element of not realism insofar as circumstance, but realism insofar as how you feel,
Yes.
the
Mhm.
emotionality. That was always a major player for me. Um, Man, I feel like I could just kind of keep going, but like those are the people that come most immediately to mind as far
Hmm.
as like what I see consciously and even the things that I've noticed subconsciously after the fact.
Yeah. Now, my wife is on a huge DCAU kick right now, and
Mm,
which is cool because that's what ended up luring me into comics was all the DC cartoons they had on the DC Universe app back when you could watch DC Universe on your Roku and read comics on it. That was amazing. They should
that
bring
was
that back.
that was a cool little like culty time in our lives, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah.
But anyway, my wife's been on Justice League Unlimited specifically.
Sweet.
And so that's been like when I go to bed, that's what's on. And when I wake up, that's what's on. And we were watching last night the episode where John Stewart and Hawkgirl like decide to be a couple, but they're
Mm,
going through all the reasons why they can't be a couple. And it's like, so whatever, let's do it. And it's like, oh, this sweet moment. And I'm just watching this like, yo, this show was like a kid's show,
mhm,
supposedly, but like that was deep. Like I felt that, she
mhm.
felt that, and here we are approaching our 40s, just relishing in it. I think that being able to bring that sort of gravity to superhero projects specifically made for children's television, like that is something super underappreciated about Dwayne McDuffie for all
Mm.
of, how we regard him as a genius.
And and he dealt with like I think gravity was like such a good word to
Mm,
describe it because he also did not shy away from sort of the core of issues. Like he was
mm,
unapologetic. Like he dealt with real trauma and he dealt with real social issues and
yeah,
real psychological and emotional issues and found a way to communicate that to a younger audience, which I think takes an incredible degree of nuance,
right.
like and an ability to execute your craft. Like
Mm,
that to me is maybe one of the most impressive things that you could possibly do is like to put those things in content for a younger audience and not talk down to them,
yeah.
but you're finding the best way for them to digest it.
Hmm.
And like that's what makes that stuff stick, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, I'm 27. I grew up with that stuff.
Hmm.
And, hearing you talk about it just makes me think I don't want to do anything else tonight but go rewatch
Yeah.
JLU,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it really is incredible, man. Like Dwayne McDuffie was I, he's one of those people, like it's you always get like into these drunk conversations where someone like, if you could have dinner with somebody dead or alive, who would it be? And like Dwayne McDuffie's on my like top five list for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. If you haven't already, I'm going to recommend Icon. Um,
Mm.
as a Dwayne McDuffie fan, right? You talk about like bringing in social issues and stuff like that without talking down to an audience. What I love about Icon, if you're not familiar, it's Icon and Rocket. Icon is this alien, crash lands on Earth, lives for like mad generations as this black dude. Ends up like, conservative lawyer type, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, yada, 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 get off my lawn, kid. That's Icon. Until this chick breaks into his house with her friends, trying to steal whatever they can get their hands on. He's in an affluent part of town. They don't assume a black man lives there. He's there to stop them. And as he stops them, he ends up showing or displaying his superpowers. He's basically a Superman type. And so she's like, yo, wait, you have these powers and you haven't been helping people with them? Like, what's wrong with you? Very similar to a moment in your book, actually. And
Mm.
so that kind of springs Icon into action. But their dynamic is Rocket is the young, teenage, hip kid. She's liberal. He's conservative. He's like the granddad. He's kind of aloof. He thinks the world should work a certain way. It doesn't because he's a black man. But they have these conversations. And what's interesting about them is like at the time, you don't know like which message the book is trying to tell you is the message. It's not like some
Yeah.
comics that we see today where it's just like, okay, Batman is just like a PSA post
Yeah.
today, right? It's like, okay, there are two opposing viewpoints. There's merit in each of them, and nobody would be wrong or nobody would be mad if you chose either side of the argument. And that's something that we don't
Mm.
get a ton in today's comics.
I mean, I think that is one of the most important things to highlight in a story like that is the ability to not tell you how to feel, but give you something to feel about
Mm-hmm.
and to think about it. And hopefully, in a situation like with Dwayne and Icon, like you hope that you walk out of it not really having an answer and
Right.
knowing that there's people think differently because they come from different places and they've lived different lives. And there is an inherent strength in being able to see something different than how you feel innately and acknowledge it for what it is. And I think that's really cool because, like, I don't know. Obviously, I've used Dwayne as I've very verbally said like he's been a big influence on me creatively and just like as a person. Like I grew up watching his cartoons and learning to think about my morality
Mm-hmm.
from his stuff. And that's the type of stuff that I aspire to put out. Like, I don't want to tell anybody how to think or feel. I just want to give them something to feel about. And, as you said in the first issue of Rise, there is a moment where that lead character it's not that he's reluctant to do it, but he's deprioritizing it. And
Mm-hmm.
it speaks on who he is as a person at that point and sort of what that supporting character um, is to him and spoilers will become for
Right.
him.
Yeah. And so let's the perfect segue. Let's compare you to Dwayne McDuffie and
Oh
talk
no.
about
Uh,
and
I've
talk
lost.
about Rise. So Rise, I read issue one um earlier today. And first of all, this is a beautiful book. So it's written by you, of course, with art by Ryan Best and the colors by Fabi Marquez. And man, beautiful, beautiful book, like on par with anything I've seen from the big two, big three, whatever we want to call it, right? Like the storytelling is on point. The book is just great, but it's about this sort of Superman type, but he gets his powers from like this the way his dopamine is like wired in his brain. And so it's like whenever he has like a sort of positive experience, then it energizes him to go out and save the world and do what he needs to do. And of course, conversely, if he's not feeling that great about himself, it does impact his ability to perform. And
Yeah.
so, we see in a couple of different situations, one where he's super motivated, one where he's less so. And it's like, okay, how's he gonna act? And I feel like the interesting question that's raised is like, how is he going to do the right thing regardless of how he feels about it?
Mhm.
And it's like, that's interesting. But so to bring that type of those type of questions into a superhero book, what made you decide that that had to be a superhero story?
It's funny that you say that because it felt like my only option because I mean for years, right? Like the last 3 years, I've said that I don't want to do independent superheroes because it's so hard to stand out among the legacy and the iconicity in a
Mhm.
real way, right? Like if I'm telling the story, I don't want it to be my Superman.
Right.
One, spoilers, I would love to write Superman one day.
Hmm.
And I don't want to just reskin it
Yeah.
because I can't beat that legacy and that iconicity and just do it somewhere else.
Hmm.
But you know, as a young man who grew up without a real father figure and who spent really pivotal time in his life locked inside because of the pandemic, I realized like as a man, um, I didn't really know who I wanted to be. And I knew that I wanted to be good, but I didn't really know exactly what that meant or how to do that.
Mm.
Um, and I felt like that was the way to play with it. Like I know that like when I'm at my best or when I'm feeling my best, I'm capable of doing well by the people around me. And I thought about the times where I wasn't being the person that I wanted to be, and it was because I was not feeling particularly great about myself or about my circumstances. And
Mm.
I was like, like how do I translate that into something that I felt like I could make an impact with in a story?
Mm.
And it was the only way I felt like I could do it was through the superhero or the Superman, right? Like I
Hmm.
was like, how do you play with that? And it's funny because I said I didn't want to do it for so long, and it was at Heroes Con last year.
Mm.
Ryan and I were friends, and we had met like a couple times through conventions, and I had been wanting to work with him for a while, but I didn't have the project yet. Like I really I didn't know what it was. And he ended up doing a short story for me in Minutes to Midnight. It's the last story in that book called The Bear Market Businessman. I was like, okay, so we stick, like we click, we get this.
Mm.
And we were drunk in a dive bar. And I was
Mm.
like, let me tell you about this story.
Yeah.
And so I leaned into it and I was like, I really, like, if we do this, we got to make it ours. And it can't be contrarian for being contrarian's sake or include elements just because it's shocking or surprising.
Mm.
Those changes have to come from what the story needs from us.
Mm.
Um, and at the same time, if I'm doing this, I still want to be able to play around with the things that make superheroes cool,
Yeah.
right? Like the things that drew me into it and still do. I'm still a fan of this stuff.
Hmm.
Um, and so I really also had to consider like what were the strengths of my team, right? Like Ryan, what's cool about him is even though his style isn't particularly realistic, he
Hmm.
captures a spirit in his characters and an expressionality.
Yeah.
They have real emotions. They might be drawn with two-dimensional lines, but they have real emotions. It's
Hmm.
clear he's selling you on it. Um, and so that to me was always going to be the core of this story. It's like I know that he can do something cool and fun and bombastic, but like can we do the emotional stuff?
Hmm.
Um, and then with Fabi, I mean, she she was really able to key in on the atmosphere of the story and
Mm.
how to use the palette and how to use different rendering techniques and lighting and color to not only give this the aesthetic sort of pop art aesthetic of what you're looking for in superheroes, but to really focus in on what's making Ryan's inks great, right? And
Mm.
reinforce that. And then you get into the letters too. Like Matthias with his letters, I think he is the perfect bow, that
Hmm.
ties all of us together, me, Ryan, and Fabi, um, by locking in the visual identity through the lettering design. I mean, like, and also the flow. Like he affects the flow of the storytelling in such a big way.
Mhm.
And this made for such a cool book. Like I had texted I think Fabio like a month ago, and I was like, it's really crazy for me to admit this out loud, but I think I'm the weakest link
Mhm.
on this book. And I've never shied away
Yeah,
from feeling from admitting that, like, I feel like I'm pretty good at what I do for how little time I've been doing it.
yeah,
But these guys really, they're the real deal.
yeah,
And they make this book special. And, I couldn't ask for anything more because that's the exact thing we set out to do.
yeah. No, that's the book is beautiful. It's the book that comes to mind. The first comparison I have, right, is Superman Lost, which series recently wrapped. It's written by Christopher Priest, but the art in it is Carlo Pagulayan,
I
who
love Carlo.
did a lot of Priest Deathstroke run,
Mhm.
and but the colors, the vibe are very similar to me. There, I can also see like a bit of like Doc Shaner in this work.
Mhm.
Like, um, it's 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 very good. It's fundamentally sound. What I love are some of the page layouts. There's one double page spread in particular where it's like you're visually guiding like where the eye should go because it's not read in traditional panel order.
Yeah.
Um, but the some of these page designs, even showing like how the endorphins are working, like, you know, being filled or depleted, like there's a lot at work in this book visually. But no, you're right. The lettering design adds a lot too. Like it's not like, I don't know, say like Daniel Warren Johnson, where it's like just a ton of like sound effects and things like kind of just there to be visually cool. But
Mhm.
there's also just there's something super fundamentally sound about the letters. But then like they're I'm looking at this page that, we're this is an audio podcast, but I'm looking at this page where, he's deciding whether or not he's going to go into this burning building because he's like, I do not
Mhm.
feel up to this task right now.
Mhm.
And the placement on this word balloon with the long tail, like, it's perfect. Like,
Mhm.
it could have been closer to him and it would have served the same purpose, but just putting it in the middle of the page where your eye was already drawn to anyway, it's just such a great decision. Like, it's stuff like that that's just like you don't notice it unless you notice it, but
Yeah.
it's perfectly placed. Like, it's great.
Yeah, Matthias is so good. He's so damn good, and I'm so happy that he decided to be a part of this project because, funnily enough, the that story that I did with Ryan in Minutes to Midnight, originally I was going to letter it, and
Mm,
then I was like, I'm kind of just okay. Like I'm
yeah.
not, I don't think I'm good enough to letter this story. And that was actually the first time I was able to work with Matthias as well. And
Mm,
so getting to pair those two back together again was fun, particularly because in that story, we had another page where a character's running up a stairwell and um we did a reverse reading order on a page, and it's just
hmm.
like, of course, like this is, I think, just going to become a trope of our
Yeah.
collaboration with the three of us.
Nice. It's a good trope to have. Uh,
Yeah.
so So Rise, yeah, no, issue one was awesome, and it's funny because, and I told you this like before we even booked the interview, right? I was almost afraid to touch the book, right? Because it's like, okay, I read the synopsis. I'm okay. This is like it's a guy who's running off endorphins, and then like the teaser page, is him in like a, we'll call an intimate moment,
Mhm.
with a lady he meets in a bar, and I'm like, okay, so is this guy just gonna be running around being like a sleazeball and be like, yeah, but I could, but oh snap, I just realized that very well could have been like a Dave Chappelle reference, right? Like, it's like, but I'm saving the world though. Um, but, but yeah, like, so I was like, okay, I'm going into this cautiously. I don't know, is this going to be like a book for shock value? Like, what's this going to be? I was very pleased to find in this book such an emotional core. And you talked about being very emotionally honest with even your promotion of a book. But something that stuck out to me is in each of your works, there's a foreword. You don't typically get forewords in single issue comics, but in each of your books, there is like a little prelude to the book, like, hey, thanks for reading this. Here's how I was feeling as I was trying to bring this idea to you. Hopefully it's successful. Hopefully it lands with you.
Yeah.
Either way, thanks for your support, right? But there's an emotional honesty, one, in just your approach to getting people to buy the book, but also on the page. It's like this dude, John, is wrestling with himself. And just through this one issue, I'm like, oh, this book is a lot deeper than I imagined it being. And I'm all the way here for it.
Oh,
What?
thanks, man.
No problem, man. But how is it? I guess we kind of talked about it a little bit on the front end, but how is it wearing what I assume to be your emotions on your sleeve so hard in your work?
Oh, it can be tough because I think that there's already um a lot of like misapprehension about writers. When they write about something, people immediately assume like, oh, you must feel this way. And even then, as honest as I try to be with these stories, I also try not to make them. I don't want to hit people with a hammer. Like a
Mm-hmm.
big Harley Quinn hammer. Like I still want to try to be nuanced about it. Like I really do try to even push myself and like my emotional foundations.
Mm-hmm.
Like so in the second book, um, we bring back the aggressor from the domestic assault scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I begin to ask the question, because this is a question that I ask myself is this person redeemable? Does this person deserve forgiveness? Can they earn it? Will they earn it? Because I think about that a lot,
Yeah.
right? Like in an age, especially in an age of social media where people who some people do awful things and deserve to be treated awfully, and some people
Mm-hmm.
do awful things and work their entire lives to try to rectify their mistake. And some
Mm-hmm.
people don't do particularly bad things and still get treated as if they're the scum of the earth. And there's a lot of nuance to that conversation. And this character does an awful thing and feels awful for it. And I begin to question, like, what is the point of no return? And it doesn't mean that I have an answer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not smart enough to be a Dwayne McDuffie and maybe have an answer and not give it to you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I really don't know if there's an answer, but I'm okay with wrestling
Yeah.
with the concept, as uncomfortable as it makes me feel, and as difficult as it might be to confront. And that's kind of always what I want to do. Like I never really feel like I have 100% of an answer of everything on everything, because I think context is important and I think circumstance is important. And
Mm-hmm.
there's no way you can ever have 100% of that, no matter what environment you're in. So in terms of like how do I do it, I think that's the only way that I know how to tell stories. It's the only way I can get myself to care about them.
Mm-hmm.
I find myself watching movies that people are like, oh, it can just be fun, and I was like, but why? Like why?
Yeah.
Like what is this? Why is this character doing this? Like what's their core wound?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the way that stories appeal to me.
Yeah.
Is building that emotional connection with either a situation or a character or both.
Yeah.
Um, it makes me more interested to, it like, yeah, it makes me a lot more interested. And so I feel like that's the only way that I can produce, it's the only way I can even get myself interested in telling my own story,
Mm-hmm.
is by having that type of emotional conflict.
Yeah. I think that specific conversation, right? Like, how far is too
Hmm.
far, right? I think I've heard it one way, like, can people be like irrevocably good or irredeemably bad, like, right, as a concept, right? I think that's a conversation that the comics community needs to confront. In the few years I've been in, like, we've seen just a lot of different situations, and it's like, mistakes are made and things happen, and it can unfortunately end like really really badly, like, and it's It's crazy. And yeah, I just I also don't have the answers to these questions, and wouldn't pretend to, and like just leave you in the dark. I don't know, what the answer is, but maybe just watching someone go through that journey is enough to sort of, muster up some empathy,
Yeah.
and, hopefully we see different outcomes in the future. Um, but man, no, this book is awesome. Like,
Thank you.
uh, at least through one issue, right? So I gotta back it to see if it continues to be awesome. But what types of things are going into? I know we haven't gone live with the campaign, at least not at the time of recording. But
Mm.
what kind of things are up for grabs in this Kickstarter?
Yeah, man, we've got a lot of fun stuff. So, we're gonna have art commissions from Ryan,
Mm,
and man, he just got a really cool new set of markers. So he's for this campaign offering some really beautiful custom full color commissions. There are some examples, and actually after we go off live, I'll show you some of them. But uh, yeah, he's doing several different sizes of commission, either black and white or full color, from like a I think it's like a 3 by 5 inch sketch card to a full like 11 by 17 piece. They're stunning. Like I actually have the pieces that he did for the first campaign up
mm,
in my like little fulfillment center in my
mm.
house. And they're beautiful. Like there's like a Doctor Doom piece and a Cable piece that I wish I did not have to send to somebody. So a lot of cool options like that. You can get drawn into the book, which is
Mm,
super cool. And I always try to make it a fun cameo. Like actually in issue one, the guy that gets pulled from John in the sports bar so that he can sit next to Issa was a backer. Shout out to Paul. Or actually, the mayor is one of my most supportive readers ever. Is
mm.
backed like almost every campaign, shows out. So it's like, okay, he wanted to get drawn into this book. Boy, is he going to get drawn into this book. So Mayor is actually a backer of several of our campaigns. So shout out to Brian. Um, You've got opportunities for a couple original art pages. Ryan always inks a couple of pages traditionally, and
Mm.
we have those up for grabs as well. You can obviously catch up and buy both issues of Rise. We've still got, as of the time of this recording, all of the variant covers to issue one. So even the ones that were printed in a little bit smaller quantity are still going to be available for the launch of issue two's campaign. Um, We've also got art prints. We do custom merch.
Mm.
We have just discounted bundles, for example. So I think as of somebody watching this on the day that it posts, you might still be eligible for some early bird discounts, which we always run. So they're both time and quantity limited.
Okay.
Usually it's like within the first 48 hours and within a certain number of people, you can claim books and like rare variant covers and bundles at a discounted price.
Mm.
So we've got a bunch of stuff going on. I mean, we have some tiers, for example, where you can become an official producer of the book and
Mm.
get brought into like a producer's meeting with everybody, including the creative team, and you'll be able to ask whatever questions you want, learn whatever inside baseball you want from us. Um, and we're thinking about pushing open some new doors. So, for example, for issue two, I've been toying around with for retailers doing retailer exclusive covers.
Mm.
And I feel like if anything in my career, I've shown I've got a pretty great stable of talented people who are willing to draw a picture or two for me.
Yeah.
So, there's some really great art to be won from that. But to get people in on the ground floor, we've also got stretch goals based on the amount of money that the campaign is making, and also backer goals. So to incentivize just people coming in, giving the book a chance. So we've got like a stretch goal variant cover. We've got some stretch goal upgrades to covers with like spot glossing and foil and so on and so forth. So, these are free upgrades
Mm.
that we're just trying to get people in on the ground floor to help us provide for them for the same price that we would have provided, a really high quality product, but with less of the sprinkles on top,
Right. No, that's awesome, man. Well, I'm excited. And the campaign for Rise issues one and two, you can get caught up or, continue the journey with issue two, live on Kickstarter right now as we speak. Well, as you listen, I should say.
Yeah.
And so go back it. Like I said, I mean, it's a story that like on its face sounds like it could be going to like an edgy place or like a shock value type place, but it really has an interesting emotional core. There are questions raised by it, even just through one issue that I'm like, I gotta see the answers to these. And it's beautiful. Like the art is amazing. The color, like the art, the colors, the letters, all of it. Like it's just a great package. So go back Rise on Kickstarter. The links are in the description of this video, as well as the show notes of this podcast. But where else, if the people are trying to keep up with you, Trevor, where can they?
Well, man, thank you so much for the kind words, and for the praise. This is a special team of people together making this book, and we're trying so hard to do something different. And you know, I've never felt I feel so validated in being able to work with these guys and what they're producing and how people are responding to it. So thank you
Mm,
first and foremost for that.
no problem.
In terms of finding me, you can find me on Twitter at PWatchPress, which is kind of a truncation of Pocket Watch Press. But you can find me at Pocket Watch Press on Facebook and Instagram, and I think probably on Threads. I don't use it as much, but I feel like I probably should get in the habit of that.
Right.
But if you happen to find me on any social media, there is always a link tree in the description where you can find whatever my Kickstarter project is at the time, socials, and whatever other cool things we're promoting. So sometimes it's the newsletter or sales on the website or what have you. But yeah, and if you guys happen to be coming around to any conventions this summer, I'll be at Heroes Con, I'll be at San Diego Comic Con, and I'll be at Terrificon in Connecticut. So hopefully you guys get to see me there.
Nice, nice. Well, again, I'm going to leave all of Trevor's information down in the show notes. Go back the campaign, follow the man on social media. This won't be the last one. So, Trevor, you are welcome back at any time. We might even have to do like a top Batman books countdown. I'm looking at your shelf behind you there.
Thanks, man. I would love that.
Awesome, man. Well, again, thank you for your time. And hey, I don't know what you guys are out there doing, but go back the campaign and then read something dope today. Peace.